Good afternoon. Welcome to MIDC's Walks and Talks series. My name is Mark Rupert. I'll be your host this afternoon, as usual. The topic of today's talk will be the dark arts, the hidden benefit of lighting design. Giving the talk today is our guest, Paul Nulty. Paul, for those who don't know, is the founder of Nulty Bespoke, and Studio N, conglomeration, I guess, of international architectural design consultancies. Welcome, Paul.
Hello. Hi. Can you hear me?
We can. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us today. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a note that during the talk, people can put questions up online. That's on the sidebar there. The answers session will come after the talk, and I'll try to get as many of your questions as possible in. And that's it. So from that, the floor is yours, Paul.
Excellent. So I'm going to hopefully share my screen, and then you can all see my presentation. So if I do this, hopefully you can now see my screen. Yep, are we all good? Excellent. Well, hello, and thank you for the invitation to come and present and talk to you today. It's kind of an interesting topic, I hope. For people, and this presentation is really about the hidden benefits of using a lighting designer and why you should seriously consider that on projects, because there's an awful lot to think about when it comes to light and lighting. It isn't just about making stuff look sort of pretty, as it were. So I'll do a very quick intro. As you already stated, my name is Paul, and I'm founder of Nulty Lighting. We have 4 offices. We're based in London, Dubai, Miami, and Bangkok. And what you should be seeing now is a lovely picture of my team. I promise that we're not a pop group, really. So we're based here, and I'm sat here in our office in London this morning on a pretty miserable day outside. So we work on all manner of projects, ranging from kind of hospitality with people like Hakkasan through to hotel projects. We sort of one of our most famous projects that we've worked on is here in London, which is the Ned, which is a Grade 1 listed, also a Grade 2 listed Edwin Lutyens building. It's a really stunning old bank that was converted into a hotel by the Soho House Group. As I say, we also have an office in Dubai, in the Middle East. We work on lots of weird and wonderful projects out there, including DIFC Coffee Zone, Jebel Ali Park View Hotel as well. We finished last year. And then we also work on kind of weird and wonderful projects as well, things like the Design Museum, which is here in central London, which is the old Commonwealth Institute building with John Pawson Architects. Harrods we do a lot of work with. This is a wellness spa and clinic. We did for them a few years ago, through to some sort of large-scale retail projects, including Bloomingdale's here in Kuwait, and then little gyms. So we kind of know our stuff when it comes to light. We work across a lot of sectors. And the plan today was to talk to you about the hidden benefits of light and lighting design, because there's a lot to consider beyond it just being pretty, as I said earlier. So the first question I sort of want to pose really is, who is a lighting designer? And good lighting design can be undertaken by a number of people. Those procuring lighting design have a lot of options when it comes to going and getting advice. And I apologise now if I alienate some of the audience with what I'm about to show you, but hopefully you'll kind of get the gist. So who out there is a lighting designer? Well, first and foremost, the architect can be a lighting designer. Our stereotypical architect with his black roll neck shirt and glasses. An architect, when it comes to light and lighting, they tend to understand layouts and aesthetics, but not so much the impact of that intangible stuff that is called light. Equally, we can get our interior designer to specify the light fittings, and our wonderful and glamorous interior designer, they will often choose beautiful light fixtures, often decorative chandeliers and such like. But often the interior designer struggles to understand the intangible stuff, which is light. Yet again, very similar to our architect. Equally, I'm being a bit mean here, we can go to our engineer with his pens in his pocket and his short sleeve shirt, and our little geeky engineer, yeah, he can give you advice on light and lighting. But often with engineers, it comes down to a bit of a tick box exercise. Engineers often get, they like things to be pretty black and white and not subjective. And really what they want to do is adhere to code. So they'll often work to the regulations and accreditations and make sure that you have the right quantity of light. But they're not necessarily interested in whether that quantity of light is the best quality of light. And they are two very different disassociated topics, quality and quantity. Equally, we can go to our manufacturer. Why not? They'll give you some free lighting advice. They know a bit about lighting because they sell the product. But understand that if you're getting a manufacturer to choose your light fittings for you, you're kind of asking the fox to guard the hen house, because our manufacturer is he's making his money on selling boxes. So why wouldn't he want to charge you as high a price for that light fixture as possible and sell you as many of those light fixtures as possible? And I'm not suggesting that every manufacturer is quite that unscrupulous, but they are drawing from a limited palette of information, also a limited palette of product. And often, that manufacturer is a salesman. He's not a qualified or trained creative designer. So it always sort of surprises me when people go and take lighting design advice directly from a manufacturer. You certainly wouldn't go and get your bricklayer to design you a house, for example. So it's not kind of dissimilar to that. Equally, you can go to your contractor, and good luck if you go to a contractor, because they are a weird and wonderful breed. Our contractors, they want to build things and make life easy, but they don't necessarily think logically all the time, and they particularly don't think creatively, unless they're thinking maybe creatively as to how to install something, particularly in a swimming pool. God bless him. If he's an electrician, I don't think his life's got a great lifespan there, as if he's on a ladder in a swimming pool. Or equally, we can go to our design suppliers, and I find there's quite a pertinent image, because design suppliers, actually, often they can be trained and creative lighting designers, but design suppliers are still selling stuff, so it's still in their interest to shift as many boxes as possible at as high a price as possible. So you're not necessarily getting the right level of design advice and time to design. And for the developers in the room, the one thing I would say that is often undervalued, particularly in the Middle East, is time to design. We get an RFP and it's all go in terms of program, but often good design requires thinking time, and good design takes time. So when we're rushing, it sometimes it gets sort of missed off, and design suppliers will deliver very quickly, but as I say, they will deliver not necessarily the best value scheme, and it is about seeking independent lighting design advice. So here is a wonderfully good looking and handsome independent lighting designer. But as I sit here, I sort of speak for the whole of the independent lighting design community, in so much that it is open and honest advice that we're giving, hopefully creatively and hopefully impartially, without any affiliation to manufacturers. So if we do it right, then we are beautiful little angels giving you the right advice and acting on behalf of our clients, solely for our clients. And really, if we do that right, then actually we bring a whole series of benefits to the project, because it's not in our interest to have you spending more money than you necessarily need to. It's in our interest to give you the most creative scheme possible. And in doing so, we provide good lighting design advice. So before I sort of jump into the kind of 10 hidden benefits of lighting design, as I would see it, I just want to kind of define what lighting design is not and why. So what I would say for the manufacturers in the room, good lighting design is not just about choosing nice product. There are loads of wonderful and sexy light fittings out there that look amazing, and I've no doubt that they're technically very good. But lighting design should be about the intangible. It's about that essence, the je ne sais quoi, the emotion in the room that you're trying to create, rather than just going out and choosing a nice bit of hardware. It isn't about, you know, contractors ensuring that something is just buildable. You know, it's got to be as quickly and as easily buildable as possible. It's not just about that. There's that essence of capturing the kind of intangible emotion that's required in a room. It isn't for our engineers just about achieving the quantity of light, because quantity of light doesn't necessarily mean a space is going to look and feel beautiful, and that's particularly important when it comes to things like hospitality and F&B, where it's all about creating the right kind of mood and atmosphere. And it is partially, but not entirely, about it being affordable. I mean, we live in a world where budgets are getting tighter and tighter, and, you know, design has to be you know, kind of the most valued part of the project, but equally, you know, with the world we live in, as I say, we have to deliver that value on as tight a budget as we possibly can, which means, as an independent lighting designer, I really want my clients to be getting the best value for the money that they are spending. And nor is good lighting design just about achieving legislation and accreditation. That is definitely part of what is required. We need to make sure we hit local code. We need to make sure we are achieving, you know, the relevant certificates like LEED or WELL or BREEAM Excellence. You know, whatever that certification that is required, then fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a decent piece of lighting design. And nor for the architects in the room, you know, does you know, achieving a beautiful layout on a two-dimensional plan you know, create a piece of lighting design. It's great that all the lights line up the windows and all the junctions and everything, but what about the intangible stuff? What about the light? And if we don't get it right, then we fail a lot. And I'm going to show you sort of a few examples of how we can achieve all of that criteria, but end up with pretty poor quality of light. So why does none of those aforementioned sort of variables necessarily make good lighting design? Well, here are some examples. So this car showroom, beautiful geometric grid of light fittings. We've sold a lot of downlights into this space, and yet look at this kind of tide mark that we get around the wall. You know, we get this horrible shadowing, we get this cusping. There's no kind of real highlight or definition on the cars, and, you know, heaven forbid they were selling something expensive in here. If it's done well, then a space can become really quite interesting. The product starts to pop, the space starts to recede. You know, it's still meeting the same criteria, but it's adding that layer, as je ne sais quoi, it's adding that layer of emotional connection, and that's the point. Take this supermarket. This has won a lot of awards, this supermarket, and for the love of it, I don't really understand why. You know, when you walk in, the eye is drawn up to the ceiling and drawn towards the light fixtures, and they're not selling lights here, they're selling product, they're selling food. So the eye should really be drawn towards the food. And we look at this example here of a supermarket in Poland, and all of the light and focus is on the merchandise, and it's away from the ceilings. So it just focuses the eye where it's required. And take this office space. This is an office space in the northeast of the UK, really drab, really uninteresting, uninspiring. I certainly wouldn't want to work there. It's actually a project we worked on. We didn't do this piece of lighting design, I promise. But what we did do is we refurbished the office, and it now looks like this. So it's exactly the same office, I promise you. The lighting is actually very simple, linear fluorescent battens. It's not even LED. But the overall design and the overall quality of the space has been enhanced, and it's very much not about the light levels, it's not about the budget, it's not about the accreditations. It's very much about putting the right light in the right space at the right time, so that it looks and feels much more interesting. One of my least favourite projects in all of Dubai. This is the Rixos down on JBR, if you know it. The lighting designer here has basically just created a whole load of lines of light and forced them onto the building. It has no respect for the architecture of the building or the form of the building, save for this front leading edge, which has a sort of fold in it. The rest of the building is a flat building, and we have this kind of really odd, ugly looking kind of line of light, which is great for the lighting designer's ego, but not so great, I think, for describing the architecture. If they really wanted to do it in a better way, then something like this would have been better, where the lines of light are very much about describing the form of the building. So that the lighting reacts to and enhances the architecture of a space. And this is really what it's all about. Good lighting design is about enhancing the architecture, enhancing the environment, enhancing the interior design, so that we engage with it in a much better way. So what is that essence, as I say? Well, I'm now about to launch into a evangelical kind of rant about the sort of 10 benefits of a lighting designer. So bear with me. I hope some of this is slightly controversial, and I hope some of this is at least a talking point. So as I mentioned earlier on, lighting design is more than just making stuff look pretty. Hard Rock Hotel, wonderful. We did it last year, we finished it, and it looks really pretty. But those benefits go way beyond just the visual elements of these projects. So the first benefit, I've sort of already touched on it. It's very much about emotional connection, taking people, architecture, and light and combining them. And if we do that in a really beautiful way, no matter how little money we spend, then we can emotionally engage people with those spaces. Take something as simple as Loy Krathong in Thailand. It's beautiful lanterns getting led off into the sky. It's a small, tiny naked flame in a paper bag being led off, and it looks stunning and beautiful. It doesn't take complex pieces of light, and we can do that with artificial light. Something as simple as the old incandescent light bulb, in the right place at the right time and used in the right way, can become something genuinely beautiful. It doesn't have to be a complicated piece of lighting design, but equally we can do things like create beautiful and emotionally engaging spaces just by using the right light. So creating pockets of darkness, and one of the benefits of good lighting design for sure is understanding dark as much as understanding light. Any good lighting designer could describe themselves as a dark designer, because it's very much about contrast and drama, and it's that interplay of contrast and drama on the surface and engaging with the surface that really brings intelligent lighting design to the fore. So the second hidden benefit of good lighting design is about brand reinforcement, and we're going to play a little game here. I'm going to say some, normally if I was stood in front of you, I would ask people to shout out, but unfortunately we live in a world these days where we're all online, so I can't. But let's say when we're looking at reinforcing brand, light has a really kind of interesting role to play. So I want you to think of a retail brand, and I want you to think of a retail brand that screams natural. I want you to think of that brand, the same brand that think about their design, their store design. It's very simple. It's going to be pretty homogeneous in terms of the quality of light. So we're thinking something simple, something that wants you to at least think that they're a natural brand, that wants to engage with you in the easiest, simplest way. And it's something, for example, Apple do really well. When you think of an Apple store is all about simplicity, ease of navigation. They want very, very homogeneous levels of light. So when we look at the latest kind of designs in Apple stores, it feels like daylight. What Apple want you to think is that their product is really natural and easy to use, and it is completely reinforced by the simplicity of the design, of which lighting is a huge part of it. And what's really interesting about an Apple store, apart from the fact that the trees in some of the stores have to go on holiday every 6 weeks because they don't get enough natural light, it's incredibly energy hungry as well. It's quite an inefficient piece of lighting design because we have these large barrosol ceilings, these backlit ceilings with lots of light behind them. So it's actually not that natural. And in some of the later Apple stores, they even have fake gobo projection to make it look like there's sunlight dappling through the trees. So it's all about sort of faking it, but creating that sense of simplicity. Think of a hotel brand now. Think of a hotel brand that screams hip and fashionable, but not only is it hip and fashionable, it is this kind of futuristic luxury. This is exactly what their brand stands for and what they're after, and they want you to feel when you stand in their spaces, but also that their brand is quite playful. So it's kind of trendy and playful and futuristic. And I would imagine most people are thinking W Hotel. Really interesting brand. They know their core demographic. They know who they want to stay at a W Hotel. They know kind of it's that Instagram generation. It's hip and it's trendy because of it. So when you look at the design of a W Hotel, it screams Instagrammable, beautiful shops everywhere, super cool kind of nightclub environment for that demographic. So we have lots of saturated light in the entrance of a W Hotel. Again, lots of saturated light, lots of intricate details, very, very dynamic spaces that start to feel like a nightclub. And even the W on the Palm in Dubai, that entrance feels like a fun fair. It is very young and youthful and vibrant as an entrance, and it's all about light. All of this ceiling detail is all about coloured light in that space. Everything is about creating a kind of beautiful tableau, a beautiful Instagrammable shot everywhere, because even across retail and food and beverage these days, everything is about how we can advertise and market. And we live in a world now with Instagram where it's easiest, it's never been so easy to get your product or brand out there if you can create these moments. And light has a huge role to play in creating those moments and therefore reinforcing the brand. Third benefit of lighting design, which is perhaps a little bit more obvious, but there are some huge savings if you bring a good lighting designer on, savings in both energy consumption and operational costs. I'm going to just show you very quickly a retailer, because we have more information on this particular retailer than we do some of our other projects. But we worked here in the UK with a company called TK Maxx. In the US, it's called TJ Hughes. They're a pretty low budget retailer. This was their store. It was pretty grim, to be honest. Had lots of downlights in the store, and they came to us and said, we really need to save around 20% of the energy consumption that we're currently consuming. What can we do? And we said, turn the lights off and go home, really, because it was a pretty awful store. But we said, okay, we'll have a look at it for you. And then we went and we did some light tests. And actually, you can see here on the left-hand side, the store was dark. Our actual advice to the client was, don't save 20% energy, put more light in, spend more energy, because you'll probably get a higher level of sales. The stores already appear quite gloomy. And then we ended up in this large debate, and the client said, no, we really need to save the energy. We have a large estate. It's a big saving if we can make 20%. How do we go about doing it? So we thought long and hard about it, and we ended up designing a scheme that took, on the right-hand side, their existing scheme of lots and lots of downlights. We changed that scheme to linear LED product with some metal halide spotlights and better perimeter lighting. The reason for that is because we navigate a space by the vertical surfaces, so we want lots of light onto the verticals, and hopefully the LED lighting would give a slightly more homogeneous and brighter level of light. We did our calculations. We were actually able to increase the levels of light because the store needed it, but also reduce energy consumption. And actually, when we did the calculations, we even surprised ourselves, dare I say it. We came out with a 41% energy saving. So huge energy saving by converting from downlights to linear LED, but also managing to increase their light levels by about 30%. So win-win. So this is what the store was before, and then this is what the store turned out to be afterwards. It's never going to win a piece of beautiful kind of design. It's not winning any awards for that. It's not that kind of retailer. It's a budget retailer. But the levels of light around the perimeter are significantly higher, so we can navigate the store much better. The levels of light across the store are much higher, so we can see the product much better, and their energy consumption is significantly lower. And then we metered it, so we actually have tangible evidence for it. And what we can see here in the black line here is the amount of energy being consumed pre the installation of the lights, and energy being consumed post the installation of the lights. and you can see a 40% drop in energy consumption. So it's not sexy at all, but there's a tangible benefit there, because there's you have a store of 300 units, a business of 300 units, then suddenly those energy savings add up. And we've undertaken very similar exercises with hotel brands. This is the Dorset City Hotel here in central London, refurbishment and replacement of lots of light sources, and they've got a sort of fairly considerable energy saving, particularly in corridors. Often guest corridors are a wonderful place to look at sort of reducing energy, but also maintaining a degree of rhythm and visual interest, because it's still, even though it's circulation, it's still very much part of that customer journey. The fourth benefit in all of this is savings on procurement. So this is where I go and pick on manufacturers and design suppliers. The reason this is a benefit is because good lighting design doesn't need to be expensive. This is a very simple space that we illuminated here in London. It's a reception space, and really easy. A few downlights, some ceiling coffer lighting, but it still looks and feels lovely as a piece of lighting design. Now, what would you typically pay for a downlight? Well, I can tell you now. We know for a fact, because we spoke to a developer, for a downlight something like this, they were paying around $90 for a downlight. It's an LED downlight. Yours for that bargain, $90. Well, I can tell you, as an independent lighting designer, if we know where to procure fittings from, we can get very, very similar product. So it's very similar downlights, as you can see, but for a third of the price. Now, if you're working on a project with 10,000 units, suddenly that becomes very interesting, because that's a very, very significant saving you can make. But of course, your design supplier or manufacturer isn't going to tell you that, because it's in their interests to ensure that you're ultimately spending as much money as possible on your product. So, and that, unfortunately, is life if you're not going to go after independent advice. But it's also worth stating, because there is a caveat with this, not all products are created equal. And often we have contractors come to us with an equal or approved product, and the two will look very, very similar. So there may be two downlights that look similar, but they may not perform in a similar way. And this is kind of a fifth benefit, really, that a good lighting designer will understand the technical performance of a light fitting. So, and there are a number of factors when it comes to technical performance. One of them is color rendering. That is the ability to make a color look saturated or washed out. And we measure this in what's called CRI, which is color rendering index. If you have a high CRI, then it will render color very well. And if you have a low CRI, it will render color pretty poorly. And as you can see, just as here with these strawberries, you would, if you're selling strawberries or you happen to have a lovely red velvet curtain, you want it to look as rich and as plush as possible. So you want a higher CRI, and it probably goes without saying, the higher the CRI, the more expensive the product. And the reason CRI is quite important, when we look at the spectral outputs, so this is all of the wavelengths of light. We know from science as children that there is no such thing as white light. White light is actually all of the colours of the rainbow. Newton proved that when you split white light through a prism. What actually happens is we don't have equal amounts of each wavelength of light in white light. So in daylight, for example, here on the top left, we actually have more blue in the spectrum than we do red. But we've got kind of a reasonable amount of each type or each wavelength of light. This middle image on the left here is of an old-fashioned incandescent light bulb, and here you see you have significantly less blue light and a lot more red light, and that's why old-fashioned tungsten or incandescent light bulbs look very warm. And then when we dim them and we reduce the output, actually we completely get rid of all of the blue and we end up with a lot of very rich warm tones. At the very bottom here is old-fashioned fluorescent, and these are all, this is a 3000K light source, so it's not dissimilar in warmth to a tungsten lamp. But actually we see here we have a lot of green and a lot of orange in it, but not a lot of red and not a lot of blue. So what happens if we were to use that light source onto, say, strawberries? The strawberries will look a bit washed out, but if we were to use it onto, on say, oranges, then the oranges would look really good because there's a lot of orange wavelength. So when we look at LEDs, LEDs actually have a kind of interesting profile for the spectral or the spectrum. They tend to have a lot of sort of yellows and oranges. They suffer a little bit in the very red and warm wavelengths, and they have a big spike of blue. And the reason we have a big spike of blue with LEDs is because most LEDs start life as a blue LED, and then they put a phosphor goop on top that excites, the blue excites the phosphor goop, and that's how we get white light. So there's a lot to think about here. You know, when we're looking at things like color rendering, ultimately we want the highest possible color rendering that we can achieve. Equally, we also want color consistency, and apologies for the spelling mistake that I've just noticed here. But we want color consistency, because if we buy cheap, often what happens is, you know, the scheme will look great to start with, and then get 6 months down the line or a year down the line, and we start to see the quality of the phosphor degrade, and phosphor's degrade at a different rate. And what we start to see is a very inconsistent quality of light. And that's fine if you happen to be you know, opening a store for 1 year. But if you're opening a hotel that you're hoping is going to last for 15, 20 years before you refurbish it, you don't want stuff looking like this very early on, because it's going to make that space feel pretty horrible, to be honest. Equally, luminaire efficiency or luminaire efficacy as well is really important. If you don't understand the information that manufacturers are telling you, they'll all tell you that their light fitting is super energy efficient. They'll tell you, oh, it's, you know, it's 100 lumens per watt, for example. What's really interesting though is most manufacturers will quote that as 100 lumens per watt at the LED chip. So that's the amount of raw light coming out of the LED chip, not necessarily the amount of light coming out of a light fixture. So by the time you take that LED chip and put it into a light fixture, and you put some filters over the front of it and a louver over the front of it, we significantly reduce the amount of light that's coming out of the light fitting. And when we compare one light fixture to another light fixture, that although they may look the same, the efficiencies may be very different when it comes to the luminaire. So it's really important that we understand that data and we interrogate it. Equally, color temperature is important. A lot of people don't necessarily understand the differences in color temperature. Ultimately, we measure it in degrees Kelvin. The lower the Kelvin rating, the warmer the light source. So color rendering and color temperature are not the same thing. We can make a color look great with high color rendering, but the space can feel a bit cold and uninviting if we have too cold a color temperature. So it's kind of interesting. They're two disassociated items. And design integration is another key variable when it comes to comparing light fittings. You know, again, two light fixtures might look very similar, but it might be a lot easier to install one than it is another. And that becomes particularly important when we have very kind of miniaturized details, as our interior design friends are giving us these days. You know, people don't like the look of light fittings. I think every light fitting is probably ugly. So if we can integrate them into cove details, then that's a great thing as far as I'm concerned. But we are seeing more and more those kind of cove details being miniaturized. So benefit number 6, we know we have tangible evidence that if you get your lighting right, you can increase sales and or lettings in a number of different ways. Retailers, for example, if you focus light in the right place, which is usually on the merchandise, not the floor. You can see here in this example, all the lights hitting the floor rather than the rather expensive garments that they're selling. If you get it right and you put the right light in the right place, we can see a tangible increase in sales. We have seen that with people like Nike at Manchester United, where we saw something like a 12% increase in sales. We saw that directly with people like DKNY, where we saw a 20% increase in sales in their store in Bond Street in London. So huge increases in selling in retail environments, but that also applies to residential and hospitality environments. We've seen that developers are telling us that they're able to let rentable space much quicker when they have better lighting. People tend to kind of enjoy and become more emotionally connected. And we see that both in residential sales and lettings and in commercial sales and lettings as well. So there are some tangible benefits here. We tend to find that residential and commercial developers are less happy about giving us their data, annoyingly, but they certainly tell us that that it really has a benefit in terms of sales and lettings. So benefit number 7, we can play with your mind, and by that I mean we can actually make you more alert and help you with things like jet lag. So back in the early 2000s, scientists discovered a third receptor in the eye. So we know from our school science lessons we have rods and cones, and we know that there's rods and cones. One sees in black and white or grey, one sees in colour. The third receptor actually is a ganglion on the eye that reacts specifically to blue light and the blue part of the spectrum. And that regulates our circadian rhythm. So it regulates the melatonin, serotonin and cortisol production, which keeps us alert or sends us to sleep. So if we put more blue light into a space, we can make people more alert. Now, there's a sort of a moral and ethical debate going on as to whether having control over people at work at that kind of lunchtime or post-lunchtime lull, if we creep up the blue light a little bit, we can make you more alert. Is that morally and ethically okay, or should people be allowed to have their own bodies control their hormone production? But we are seeing more and more in commercial property, in commercial projects, things like trading floors, for example, having circadian lighting installed to make sure traders are more alert in the afternoons after lunch, to ensure that they are being as optimal as they can when it comes to trading, because obviously business wants to make more money. So typically with melatonin and cortisol production, what we actually see is at night we have a lot of that, and that's what tends to make us sleepy. And then during the day that tails off, and then we also see a rise in body temperature during the day as well. A lot of that is, as I say, not entirely controlled by, but it is certainly affected by blue light. It's also one of the reasons why the advice these days is not to use a mobile phone in your bed, not to have lots of light on when you're in bed, and particularly things like TV and your phone, which all have a lot of blue light within them. So we want to minimise the amount of blue light, as I say, when going to bed. Now, let's think about that in a hotel context. You know, the Blue Lagoon Hotel in Iceland, really interesting because they have the lighting connected to an alarm clock. So let's say we set our alarm for 8 AM in the morning. What happens? The curtains are on electronic motors. So at 8 AM, the alarm is going to go off. What actually starts to happen is at about 7:30 AM, so about half an hour before, the curtains slowly start to open. The lights very slowly start to come on, and they come on at a very cold colour temperature, because what we want to do is trigger that hormonal response. We want to reduce cortisol. We want to wake people up. And with the lights slowly starting to come on, what happens is by the time 8 o'clock comes around and your alarm goes off, you're already coming out of your sleep. You are not in a very deep sleep. The last thing anybody wants, particularly me, I'm very grumpy in the mornings. The last thing anybody wants is to be ripped out of that beautiful kind of sleepy state when you're in, particularly when you're in a very deep sleep. So the idea is that we have essentially the alarm is starting to come on half an hour before you're actually woken up by that noise from the alarm. And equally, in reverse, in the evenings, warm light is very much on in the bedrooms, no blue light. So the colour temperature is very, very warm. It means that we're minimising the amount of blue light and therefore assisting people with going to bed. Now, there is a lot of evidence to show that this can actually really assist with things like jet lag. So if you fly in from one country and you want to go to bed, or you want to be more alert, then we can use colour temperature and colour quantity as well as also the amount of light. And we now measure a thing called melanopic lux, which is also takes into account the angle at which the light also hits the eye. So there are a lot of variables when it comes to calculating, but ultimately the more light and the cooler the light, the more alert you're going to be, and the lower the light levels and the warmer the light, the the sleepier you're going to be. So it's a very interesting tool, and we're certainly seeing in hotel projects now a greater emphasis on health and wellness. So this kind of technology and this thinking is really becoming quite prevalent. Number 8 of 10, wayfinding. Very, very simple tool. It's a great benefit. The eye is always drawn to the brightest point in a space. Simple. The eye is always drawn to the brightest point, which means if we put light in or around or over the reception desk, the eye will be drawn to the reception desk if it is brighter than the rest of the space. If we own a shop, then and we want the shop to feel permeable, then we want the eye to be, the bright levels of light to be at the back of the store, so the eye is drawn all the way through the store to the brightest point. So we can really start to play with what surfaces are bright and what surfaces are darker to help navigation around a space. So it helps and assists with wayfinding. Number 9, when it comes to custom products, a good lighting designer will understand how to source custom product properly. Not every custom product has to be expensive, and they can be done in a very simple way. This actually is a custom product that we had manufactured for the Hard Rock Hotel. It's a series of drumsticks that hang over the reception desk. We had an artisan turn the drumsticks, they're oversized drumsticks, and then we had a fiber optic cable put in. So very, very simple. And it looks a little bit like this. In fact, it doesn't look exactly like this because this is a project. And it provides a nice level of light plus a great feature. The interesting part about this, as I say, is that it wasn't expensive. Now, when it was originally quoted by other suppliers, it was expensive. So if you know where to go to the right craftsmen and craftspeople, then it's very easy to source relatively inexpensive decorative light fixtures. And the same for the Assembly Hotel in London. This was a really interesting project with some colour changing wall lights. This one on the right changes from white to this sort of saturated purple colour. And then in the bathrooms, we also have these bathroom lights, again, delivered on a very, very tight budget, but it's about understanding where the original kind of suppliers are, what metal workers to use, what acrylic workers to use, what glass workers to use, rather than going to a one-stop shop. A good lighting designer will have a little black book of all of these suppliers. So there's a great benefit there. You certainly get more value for your money. So sort of to round off really, the hidden benefits of lighting design ultimately are about making life easier for the architect, the interior designer, the developer, the quantity surveyor, the mechanical and electrical engineer. It's our job as lighting designers to make life as easy as possible. And controls are a really interesting example. The amount of times I go into a hotel room and I'm looking at something like this, which is the controls deck for the Starship Enterprise. You walk into a hotel room and you've no idea what button's doing what, and you get very confused, and lights are coming on or off, and you can't quite get the light levels that you want. What we really want to see is a very simple interface. And again, one of the benefits a good lighting designer can bring is understanding how simple interfaces work. There is no interface more simple than a switch on or off. And in a lot of hotel rooms, we still put switches. We don't need overcomplicated control systems. So it's really interesting kind of bringing that knowledge to each project. As I say, it's making life easy and simple is quite key. Also, when it comes to things like detailing, in making sure that access panels are designed in properly, locations of light fixtures are designed in properly. So detailing is really quite important. And us lighting designers, we don't just stand around looking like we know what we're on about. I promise you, we do very much get involved in the nitty-gritty of designing projects with interior designers and architects, and it is really about understanding those benefits. So, to finish off, the hidden benefits of good lighting design is very much about emotional connection. It's about bringing character and brand connection to the project. It is about understanding the value that you can get from your capital expenditure and your operational costs. But it's also then about joining that with the psychological impact, the sociological impact, and you can really get into, and combining that with longevity, buildability, sustainability, and technology. I always say that I am very privileged as a lighting designer because I work at the junction of technology and creativity, and it is a beautiful place to spend my working days. And until Liverpool come and sign me up as a striker, I will be doing this as a lighting designer. So ultimately, we are in the business of making better places for guests, because if we make a space better, then we're likely to get more customers, we're likely to get more guests, we're going to get happier and more efficient staff. And if we get all of that right, ultimately, we make more profit for our clients. And as much as hoteliers and restaurateurs and retailers, love doing what they're doing, they're not just in it for the love. They also want to make some money out of it, I'm sure. So it is unfortunately down to that kind of profit-driven world. So exceptional lighting, final quote from me, is very much about connecting people and emotion and atmosphere and environment. It is felt, you feel it. Ultimately, you don't just see it. And I think that's it from me. So if you want to find out more about us, then we are on all of your usual social media channels, and our website details are here. I shall hand back over now, if that's okay.
Thanks. Oop. Thanks, Paul. I don't know what happened there. There we go. Thank you very much. That was actually an excellent talk. It was really informative. I do have a bunch of questions for you, so I'm going to just start knocking them out. Let's see. So I guess the first one was one that I threw in here. It was from one we spoke about earlier. Notice that you obviously have multiple consultancies under one banner. Maybe you might like to speak to what they do. You've got Nulty, you've got M Studio, and Nulty Bespoke.
So the reason we have multiple brands, as it were, is because they're individual businesses. Ultimately, you want ideally, from a good lighting designer, totally impartial advice. But that ultimately comes at a price, which is my hugely underinflated fee. I'm a poor lighting designer. But ultimately, we do have to charge a fee for our time, because that's what we do. Now, we do have some very small projects like cafes and bars and restaurants that really don't have the kind of budget to pay fully independent advice, and often they would go to a design supplier. But again, you're never quite sure what the advice you're going to get. There are some good design suppliers, there are some not so good ones. So we set up Studio N in Dubai, actually, to cater for those very kind of small projects, which is able to give very fast advice on lighting design, but not at the kind of technical level that Nulty would give it at. So they're very much for much smaller projects. Whereas Bespoke, what we found was time and time again, we were working with clients and interior designers and architects to develop custom products on a project. And more often than not, if anything goes wrong, it's that custom chandelier in the atrium space. It'll turn up late, it'll turn up overpriced, and when it does finally go in, you won't be happy with it because that grub screw isn't quite what we wanted, or that cable entry isn't what we wanted, or we've got a shadow where we didn't want it. And I got a bit fed up of having to deal with all that stuff. So a few years back, we span it off and said, you know what we ideally want is greater control. So our Bespoke team actually, from start to finish, can design, develop, and manufacture and supply, and if necessarily install custom product. And what it means ultimately for us is that we have a greater retention over the quality of what's being provided, and it means that I, as the fussy lighting designer, gets the grub screw that I wanted, I get the cable entry that I wanted, and I have complete control over the things like the weld finishes, and it's ultimately about quality. So we spanned Bespoke off because we didn't want to offer that if it was going to affect our impartiality on the project. So we still work on projects with clients and with other custom luminaire manufacturers as well. We're not sort of wedded to our Bespoke team. So it means that we as Nulty retain our impartiality. So that's why we have 3 brands. It just means we have an offer ultimately for everyone.
Brilliant. Okay. I guess I'm just going to go right on to the next question for you. So the next one is, you have a pretty global spread and offices in some great locations. Is your approach the same across the globe or tailored specifically to the locale? Let's say difference between Miami and...
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, firstly, they're all in places I like to go on holiday. It's all about vacation, isn't it? I'm still trying to figure out how I can open an office in a ski resort somewhere. That would be nice. Jesting aside, so to an extent, no, we don't change what we do, because ultimately it's about service, being service driven. It is about quality of design. It is about quality of documentation and providing the right service and right quality. So on that level, on a design level, no, it doesn't change, because I think every client, no matter what they're paying, deserves the best possible service that we can give them. However, it does obviously change from each market, because different clients procure lighting in a different way in each of those locations. Sometimes the quality of contractors varies from location to location as well. So we have to design with that in mind. If we're designing with longevity, then we want to make sure that we're designing with buildability in mind for sure. So yeah, we have to ultimately design to the skill set sometimes of the location, as well as the availability of products in that location as well. So yes, it varies, and obviously there are cultural differences. You know, in Southeast Asia and in Asia, quite often they like colder colour temperatures. In Europe, particularly in the UK, they like very warm colour temperatures because it makes the skin look orange in the UK. So if you know Essex in the UK, then you'll know that everybody likes to have a very dark tan. So there are cultural differences for sure, which need to be taken into account, but it doesn't affect the quality of service or deliverables that we're providing.
Makes sense. I'm guessing you're saying essentially the design standard quality is at the top, but you're obviously going to service that specific client's needs and with the criteria.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Next question. What project do you think you have made that most impacts has the most impact with your approach to lighting design?
Wow.
Yeah.
Can I give? I'm sorry. I'm going to give a politician's answer here, which is kind of all of them in different ways, because you know, I love that we have such a diverse portfolio. That, you know, one day I'm working on a retail store, the next it's, you know, a United Nations campus in Lausanne, and everything in between. Because you learn things from every project, and every architect and every designer that we work with, every developer we work with, we learn things and we take that knowledge and we apply it somewhere else. And I love the cross-fertilization from one project to the next, and we're certainly seeing that in the hospitality world, because I think hospitality is now massively affecting retail. You know, retail has been dying for a long time, you know, the high street kind of retailing. And what we're really seeing now is retailers borrow from the hospitality world. So, you know, they no longer have customers, they have guests, for example. We're seeing in a much more kind of a retail about being brand destinations to go and experience a brand. So I like that cross-fertilization. So we get involved in such a diverse range of projects, being privileged enough to take all of that knowledge and apply it across sector. So it's very difficult to single out, you know, one project. I have a few projects that I like the least, if that helps, and that's usually client related. And I think we all, you know, anybody who works knows that. When clients, it's not just about lighting design. When clients, I always think genuinely, clients get the project they deserve most of the time. If you're a client that is listening to your consultants that you're spending a lot of money employing, and you're taking on board that knowledge, and those consultants are taking you on that journey, and a good consultant, whether they be acoustic or lighting or architect, you know, a good consultant is going to charge, you know, probably a premium. You get what you pay for. I think if you've got a good consultant team and a client that is open to listening and going on that journey with you, then the client will end up with the most fantastic project. If you have a client that is spending the least money on the cheapest consultants, spending the least money on the job, doesn't want to listen to anybody, has a diva fit and drops, then ultimately they're going to get a project which isn't as good as it could have been, because they themselves have limited it. So I really believe every client gets the project they deserve, and ultimately we want to give them the best project, which means we want the best relationships.
Fair response. Another question for you here. Was Nulty involved in the W Hotel in Dubai, the one you showed?
Yeah, no, unfortunately we weren't. I would love to claim that one, but no, we weren't. It's a beautiful project, so the guys that did do it, did a very good job.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Jumping back somewhat to what you were talking about earlier, I guess. How do you see the market in the Middle East, and especially now during COVID?
Tough. In a word, tough. We are definitely seeing fees reduce, so we are doing more work for less money. It's probably fair to say. I think it's a shame that in the Middle East, the first thing that happened when the pandemic hit was we saw clients, developers saying, you know what, we're going to pay you 25% less, and like it or lump it. So I think it's a real shame. I think there was a lot of disrespect between clients and some of their consultants, if I'm honest. And I think some people took advantage of it. But we live and we learn. I think there are still some beautiful projects kicking around in the Middle East, particularly in Saudi Arabia. There are some stunning projects. A lot of them are, a lot of it's infrastructure at this stage, obviously. I think, and what I hope, is that we don't revert to a model which is based on the cheapest, where we're not just employing the cheapest consultants, because if that's the case, I don't want to get in a race to be the cheapest. I'm very proud of the portfolio we have. I'm very proud of the service and the relationships we have with our clients. It's key to everything we do, and that takes time, and I can't do that for free. I'm not a charity for hard up developers. So I hope and pray that we don't revert to a model which is based around just employing the cheapest people, because then we'll just get the cheapest projects with very average design. I think there's a beautiful opportunity at the moment, particularly in Saudi, to really set kind of world-class leading, benchmarks there for design and delivery. So let's hope that that's not an opportunity let's hope it's an opportunity that doesn't get missed.
Well, just to speak back to you on that, I think it won't. I think it will come back. I think it's over time. The only question is if someone can outlast the race to the bottom. I suppose that's always the challenge, right?
That is very, very much the challenge. Yeah, and it's a challenge we face every day. I'm 21 years old. I'm just the last 6 months of age me. That's all.
That was a laugh of agreement.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just go on to the next question then. Here we go. How would you approach lighting design for an ecotourism destination?
Ooh, how would we approach it? Well, we want to understand first and foremost. So here's how we approach lighting design. We leave a whole other seminar on this stuff. The first thing any good lighting designer should be looking at is not what we're lighting or how we're lighting it. It's why we're lighting it. So, and I drill this into our team. The most important thing in design is why, because if you understand why, then you have authenticity in the design. So why am I lighting something? Then once we understand why we're lighting it, then we start to think about, well, what are we lighting? Is it walls? Is it sofas? Is it, gardens, whatever it is? So we understand, we go from why to what. And only once we've then figured out what we're lighting, do we start to think about how we're lighting it. Is it with downlights or cove lights? So it's very much a why, what, and then how approach, right? And it's step by step by step. So anybody who picks up, as I said, anybody who picks up a catalog and starts looking through product to start with should frankly be sacked. It's very much about what's the emotional connection. So why am I lighting it? What response do I want from people? So it's a long-winded answer, because when it comes to an ecotourism space, dark is your friend. Don't ever be afraid of the dark. It's about understanding the environment. So when we look at the why is very strategic. So with eco-friendly, particularly, for example, on the coast where turtles happen to be kind of quite a prominent part of the ecology, you got to look at, when you're looking at that, well, why am I lighting a space? What do I want people to experience? What do I want people to see in that space? And if you start at that strategic level, so actually it's ecotourism. Dark skies are really important. I want to minimize the impact of light pollution. So when we start to think about that strategy, then we can start to think about, well, do I therefore really need to light that wall? Do I really need to floodlight that pathway? Do I really need to, you know, have all singing, colour changing, you know, porte cochere somewhere? So the approach is about reducing energy consumption, but again, it isn't about coming up with the lowest possible use of energy. It's about understanding where to use the right amount of energy. And I think we can sometimes get bogged down in, well, it's just got to be the lowest, the lowest, the lowest. And I think actually it's about applying it in the right way. A terrible analogy I often use is, you know, I wear a suit to work, right? I don't need to spend money on a nice Armani suit. You know, I could wear a carrier bag, I'd wear a sack to work, you know, it's still clothing. It's just about applying the right kind of thread in the right way at the right time, and design, not just lighting. Design is about that, using the right design in the right way at the right time. It doesn't have to be expensive, but we do kind of want it because we want to wear clothes to work, right? So in the same way, we want design. We want a space because we're competing with other brands or other developments. So the approach has to be strategic, top down. You know, really look at the wide picture, the big picture stuff before you start narrowing down. And again, I think what happens when it's left to architects, MEP guys, and interior designers, they don't tend to think strategically about lighting. They just kind of think, oh, I've got to light my space. And I think if we understand why we're doing it in the first place, then there's a much better chance of having it a more successful solution. Very waffly answer, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm just going to throw in a bit of a different question for myself, I guess. I've noticed you're probably based on your experiences, you quantify stuff or qualify stuff by saying that you want to compete against others. But how many clients have you had that have looking for a vision, not necessarily just competition or just to beat the next guy or be a little bit better than them? How often do you come across a client that actually is looking for a vision, particularly from yourself?
Looking for a vision.
Well, something that's that has more of a visionary quality about it, rather than, you know, having to justify the believe it or not as often as you'd hope. You know, I think a lot of clients don't. We have a brilliant client. There's a company in the UK called the Manhattan Loft Corporation. They're a developer here in London. They recently developed a hotel called the Stratford, and it's within a huge tower block in just outside of the train station at Stratford, just to the east of London. The guy who owns Manhattan Loft Corporation is a brilliant guy called Harry Handelsman, and he's a developer. He wants to make his money, but when you talk to him, you know, he doesn't talk about the size of a room. He talks about the volume of a room. You know, he talks about the experience that somebody has in the space. It is so refreshing, because then it isn't about, well, how much does that cost? How much does that timber finish cost versus a stone finish? How much does that light cost versus this? It is what value am I getting for whatever the total spend is? And you know what, if I spend less money on curtains, but I spend more money on light fittings, what do I get for it? So he really, I mean, I have so much respect for him, because he really talks about the quality of the space and the experience in a visionary way. And there are very few people operating at that level. We had a nice experience with a core recently. He came to us and said, we want to rewrite our brand standards for spas. And we work with them on that, providing guidelines for them across all of their spas and all of their estate. So, but it doesn't happen enough, because people become very project orientated. And that's often because most people are employed to come and work on a project. So you come in and roles become quite transient. You go and work for a company for 4 or 5 years because you're on that particular project, and then you move somewhere else. So it really has to happen at a very, very high level. I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I know there's been a decree, for things like dark skies and going for dark skies accreditation, which actually is commendable, because there are almost no developments worldwide that have had that level of aspiration when it comes to achieving dark sky status, as it were, to the point where they had to kind of write some guidelines around it, because it's pretty new and revolutionary. But it's a rare occurrence, believe it or not, and it would be wonderful if there was that greater level of
strategic thinking. We even struggle having that level across just one development. You know, we've got projects here in London that are kind of 4 or 5 phase developments, residential developments, and the clients have had different architects and designers working on each phase, and there's not even joined up thinking from phase to phase, yet alone across huge developments, across cities. So there is not enough thought process put into planning and that strategic thinking, I think. So the short answer is not as often as you'd think, unfortunately.
Fair enough. Sad to hear, but I think everybody else can probably agree on some level and with their own experiences. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Here's a question, a little bit of a change on the topic. Do you tweak the lighting design to make it Instagrammable and photograph well, and also making it photograph well using iPhones, etc.? In other words, do you tailor your lighting for the new market, the new branding, and the new market thing?
Yeah. More than you know, actually, and in 2 or 3 different ways. I mean, sometimes it's about just creating that beautiful moment, that goes click, and it all looks wonderful. But actually, there are other levels. So in terms of Instagram moments, there's a whole lot, particularly with girls, of doing this with phones in changing rooms when they're trying on clothes or makeup, and there's a lot of this. So we tweak the color temperature and the color quality in order to make the selfie look more flattering. And then the other interesting one these days is what's called a flatty, which is in both food and beverage and retailing, which is where everybody now takes a picture looking down. And that's fine, because we all love to take a picture of our pizza or whatever else you're having for lunch. But the problem with doing that, when I have a downlight directly over the table because I want it to look nice and moody, is I immediately throw a shadow of my iPhone or other phone onto my food. Or if I'm in a shop and I'm taking a picture of a lovely pair of shoes, I throw a shadow. So now we're having to tweak the design to create less shadow in order to maximize the opportunity for a photograph. So in more ways than just the obvious. Sorry, I caught you off guard.
No. Yeah, no, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so the short answer is in more ways than just the obvious, we are having to tweak design. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. I didn't expect actually such a direct answer. You had such a quick answer for that.
Sorry.
Good. No, that's good. That's good. Okay, here's the next question. How do you use or see lighting going with the growing number of smart bulbs and smart technology now? I guess sort of a lot of the lighting is going more mainstream with the networking and IT networking of lighting, giving you more easily. It's no longer like a high-end such a high-end idea anymore. Everything's going a little bit digital, access to digital. How do you see that affecting the market? How do you see yourself engaging it? I know you talked about the switch being the most basic, but
yeah. Well, it's all about the interface ultimately. I think people understand digital addressing more better than they ever have done. People have got Sonos speakers at home. They've got online connected fridges, toasters. All this, the Internet of Things ultimately. So I think it's inevitable that lighting's going to go that way. It isn't actually as advanced as you would think it is. I mean, Philips Hue is probably the most advanced product perhaps out there at the moment. It's very much a commodity product. I'd argue, professionally speaking, it's a bit of a gimmick. It's great that it color changes. My daughter has it in her bedroom, but it's not something you would use to create kind of a high quality, moody kind of space. So that technology is still coming. It is going to come for sure. If I were in the world of lighting control systems at the moment, if I were a lighting controls manufacturer, I would probably be quaking in my boots, because whether you like it or not, fast forward 15, 20 years, those systems are going to be becoming redundant. It's all here now. And once we have kind of systems that are more secure, and in terms of broadband systems, so once we have internet systems that are more secure and have greater bandwidth, the real limitation at the moment is bandwidth. But I think once that happens, we're going to see more and more light fittings just simply plug and play, and it'll be no different from the Sonos system. So the challenge now for the lighting design community is to make sure that there is enough knowledge out there that people can, if they're going to go and buy the light fittings, they understand what they're doing with them. That's the danger at the moment, is we have lovely light fixtures and people don't understand how to use them properly. So
it does seem like it's going to, I guess in the far future or near far future, but it's going to also make lighting a bit more over time, not just the feel of the space in one moment. Now it's going to be like more high-end lighting and larger, event, more, commercial spaces where you can, or more high-end residential where you can set the mood in a space, multiple moods, and now you have multiple design strategies at the same time for the space. But yeah, interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump into the next question. This one, I think you're going to have an answer, so don't shoot the messenger. Most of the time, lighting comes as part of the last stages of a design or construction, although it plays an important role in how the space can look and feel. Do you think lighting designers should be involved? I want to shoot the person that wrote this. The lighting designers should be involved in the early stages of design and architectural design, and if so, do you think their contribution would affect the overall design outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. I'm often asked, oh, what's your favorite light fitting? And always ask me, oh, what's your favorite light fitting? My answer to that is very simple. It's a cove. It's not a light fitting. It's a piece of linear LED. For me, a cove is the kind of epitome of blending light and architecture. It's that beautiful interface because it's the architecture lighting itself. Now, when you think about that approach, that it's concealed, that it's delicate, then you really want to be having those conversations as early as possible. Because the earlier you can have those conversations, the less abortive work architects and interior designers are having to do. So it's inevitable that the lighting designer will always be half a step behind the architectural and/or interior design. We have to be, because we can't light something if we don't know what it is. But if we can have those conversations early on, then we can start to affect, how you develop that detail on the staircase, how you develop the thickness of that wall, how you develop the the ceiling layout, etc. So we want to be having those conversations early on. There is a fine line to tread, and I absolutely understand that, because it's very easy to come in and just burn a fee very quickly. And we all work on a finite fee. So I think it's important to have those early conversations and then be confident enough to say, right, you know what, Mr. Architect and Mr. Interior Designer, we're going to step away for a few weeks. You go do what you need to do, and then we'll come back to the conversation. So it's about having, ultimately it's about trust and relationships, right? And if we're having those conversations early enough, then we can start to affect things properly. It's a pain for everybody if you've issued your stage 3 pack, you've done your developed design pack, you're into detailed design, and lighting designer comes in and says, do you know what if we cut a hole in that wall and didn't have a ceiling here, and we make that exposed, and we actually make this barrasol, and we change that detail, and we really want to put that detail in that planter wall, and suddenly everyone's sort of thinking, I've now got to go back and retweak my drawing package, and it's a pain for everybody, and inevitably the QS won't have costed it properly as well. So the earlier those conversations can happen, the greater the likelihood of having a more integrated and holistic lighting solution. So the short answer is yes, we should be involved as early as possible. Ideally, as the ideal time would be as architects and interior designer are about halfway through their own concept design, is when the first conversations would like to be happening.
Can we also say that basically based on, we'll say even REBA stages, stage 2, stage 3, you would basically, as every other consultant would, you would actually put in that level of information required to inform the design.
Yeah.
So it's a conversation, right?
That's it, and it also allows greater strategic thinking. I mean, this is exactly what I said earlier on. If there's a lot of value on the narrative and on the authenticity of the design, then that has to happen strategically. And if everyone's at detailed design and rushing to get a detailed design pack out, there isn't time to sit there and think strategically that the lighting in this building needs to reflect the lighting in this building and all these strategic thoughts. So the earlier the better. And also investment from developers in proper strategic master plans.
Fair enough. Here's another one for you. With the rise of virtual events, Zoom, etc., is there a market for lighting design for virtual events and/or lighting specifically for being viewed through screens?
Yes. Yes. I mean,
good answer.
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of seeing now some commercial projects really. There's been a huge increase in the requirement for circadian lighting in offices over the last sort of few years. Suddenly, new offices, people are seriously considering lighting, the light quality for video conferencing, and actually making video conferencing not just in the VC rooms, but actually, VC capability across much wider areas of the floor plate. So the short answer is, yeah, we've absolutely got to think about it. And I think one of the things Teams and Zoom and the rest have demonstrated is that it is probably easier to work like this and present like this than any of us ever thought. I would also counter that by saying it's not as easy to be creative. It's not as easy to connect and build company culture and all these things. But I think this isn't going away in terms of us working remotely. I think there's a much greater likelihood of it. So we're all going to have to become much more aware of the quality of light for calls like this.
Agreed. Following on to that question, there's another one. How much involvement, or is there even a market for staging with lighting? Where basically you're trying to, it's coming on the lines of when you're renting a place, it sells when you have good lighting. Is there a market for when people are staging?
Very rarely. I'd love there to be. Happy to help people stage. Unfortunately, by then a lot of the architectural whatever it is in. So if what we're doing is staging with plants and furniture and furnishings, yeah, I mean, in terms of decorative fixtures, for sure, we've got involved in a bit of that, but it sort of belittles the power of light. If all you're saying is, well, we're going to put some nice floor lamps in, then actually you're not getting the most out of light. It should really be considered, and particularly if it's to things like show homes, then the lighting holistically again should be considered holistically. So I get the power of staging for sure. But you can't, we talk about layers of light when it comes to lighting and layering ambient lighting with accent lighting. You can't really do that just with decorative fixtures. So if you're staging, then it means you're otherwise going to be cutting holes in stuff and rewiring, and it becomes more complex.
Okay. Could you share your experience in landscape and public space lighting? What are the trends now in outdoor lighting?
Well, I mean, I'd be here all day. If I went through all of our experience, we do a lot of exterior spaces, both garden and landscape, and there is very much a difference. I love garden lighting because it's a piece of stage set, it's a piece of theatre. You're not worrying about red tape and whether someone's got enough light, or not. It's about just creating a beautiful moment that people look out onto from their windows. Landscape lighting and public realm lighting is a bit of a different kettle of fish, because it's not just about something to look at, it's a space that you have to be within. There's a lot of kind of red tape, as it were, in terms of light levels that you have to hit for pedestrians, for vehicular movement. But it's also really cool because it's also a little bit of theatre. So I love that. It's great fun. My background is theatre design, by the way, so that's why I like those moments. The trend really is actually towards being less frivolous with light, which is good. So gone are the days where everyone was floodlighting facades and using brash colours. It's a lot more sophisticated now. It's very much about considering the darkness as well as the light and using contrast and drama. And there are some beautiful projects out there which do that very, very well. And I also think that exterior lighting is probably the visual embodiment of wasted energy and therefore money as much as anything else, and has quite a significant environmental and ecological impact. If you look at the Twin Towers in New York, where they every year they punch two kind of large columns of light to replicate where the Twin Towers used to be. actually it's had huge impact on moth and bird migration patterns, because for the month, I think they're often there for a month or so, and all of a sudden everything at night gets kind of drawn towards that light, and then they find there's lots of dead birds and animals and things, and you know, around the searchlights there. So the trend is very much, I think, it's due to because they're becoming a greater awareness of the ecological and environmental impact. So therefore there is a trend towards reducing energy consumption, putting light where we need it, putting light downwards rather than upwards, particularly as you mentioned earlier on, talking about the dark skies and environment, you know, ecotourism and environmental projects with a very big environmental kind of philosophy. Then you know it's about putting light where it's required. So it's becoming again more strategic. It's becoming more delicate. It's becoming way more considered, which is a good thing. So I think there's very positive things happening when it comes to exterior lighting.
Cool, thank you. There's one about the circadian rhythm. What percentage of your projects do you see actively now, and then potentially going forward, actually engaging our circadian rhythm?
So when it comes to hospitality, probably about 25% of the hotels we work on now are actively talking about health and wellness in guest rooms. So not all of them, some brands don't need it, but about 25% of the hotels that we work on, we're probably having those conversations. When it comes to occupier projects, so fit out projects for offices, I can't think of a project recently where we haven't had those conversations. So I would say 100%, but realistically it's probably 90-95%. But almost all of the office fit out projects we work on are now considering some kind of circadian lighting, whether that's just to keep people more alert, whether it's just to kind of mix it up so the space feels a bit different. Almost every occupier project has got that, and saying it's becoming much more prevalent in the hospitality game. When it comes to retail, never. The only time in retail that might happen would be either around makeup concessions for vanity or in fitting rooms, so people can see what they look like at night and or what they look like during the day. Otherwise, that's about it. And in residential projects, almost never. You know, it's not. I think we had one project that wanted circadian lighting for somebody who was suffering with Alzheimer's. So it was kind of it was a very interesting project for a medical need, but that was it.
Okay, actually, it's more than I expected. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Actually. Okay, we have another landscape question. Actually, do you apply the same principles to landscape lighting, I guess, as to your interior lighting or building lighting? I guess. Also, is solar lighting becoming more popular, and does it have any negative effect on the desired lighting output?
Yes, we apply exactly the same principles. Exactly the same principles. You know, it's very strategic. It's all about the right light in the right place. It's all about darkness being as important. So the same principles and philosophies apply no matter the project, no matter whether it's inside or outside. And then as far as solar lighting goes, it's still really, it's been kicking around for years and it's never really gained, much traction. We're starting to see it in a bit of street lighting now. It's still very expensive. It's still a huge premium for it. And unless you can guarantee the sunlight, it's great if you're in Saudi, it's great if you're in the UAE. If you're in rainy England, it's not so great. And if you happen to be in Scandinavia, where half the year is in darkness, you haven't got a hope in hell of it working. So the technology isn't there yet. It's coming, but it's been coming for probably 15 years. So there's not much else I can say about that. My other half tried to buy, I shouldn't even admit this as a professional lighting designer, my other half tried to buy some solar lights for the garden. They lasted about 5 weeks and they were terrible. So I should probably have a better lit house, to be honest with you. You never see a hairdresser with a good haircut. So that's my excuse there. So solar powered lighting is not there yet by any stretch. The battery life isn't good enough. And the outputs as a result aren't good enough yet, but it will come for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And that wraps up our questions actually as well. Unless you have something you want to add, Paul.
No, I think I've spoken enough.
And very eloquently, I might add. Cool. Okay, well then, that wraps up our walk and talk today then. And thank you very much, Paul Nulty from Nulty Consultancy, for coming and speaking to us. And we'll see you guys at the next talk. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.